Hi team, welcome. Today's tutorial is actually going to be special effects gore and bruising, which is my favorite. I am so excited about this one. So for starters, you want to make sure that whatever your application is, all of your means and methods of applying them are justified. And what I mean by that is you really want to focus on what would happen in a real life scenario, because that's going to be the difference between a great application and just an okay one. So for example, because I'm going to be talking to you during this tutorial, I won't be able to keep any product on my face, so I'm actually going to do mine on my hand. But if you are one of my students, I would suggest that you do it on your face. You can also work down your neck if you need to. But so I'm going to do an application as if I had been in a fight with someone who also brought a knife to said fight. So for example, I am going to give myself bruised knuckles. And so if you look at your knuckles, right, like if I've got my hand in a fist, these two here are going to take the most impact because they poke out the most. So when I'm looking at bruising, they are going to have the deepest of bruises there. And then in terms of my cut, I'm going to have it to where on my hand, it starts out like here and then gets into like this area between the thumb and the index finger. And because I'm fighting, right, like, and grabbing, probably like my hand in this area is going to spread open a little bit more, so my cut's just not going to be like a straight slash. It's actually going to sort of teardrop out in shape, just because with all of the bending and punching and stuff, this is going to get opened up a bit more. And of course I'm going to add in some blood and gross chunky bits because this is my favorite. All right, y'all, let's get started.
All right, so the first thing that I like to do for any type of gore project is to road map out with an eyeliner pencil just where I will be putting in my scar wax. So next I'm actually going to use this bruise wheel, and I'm going to use the maroon and the plum colors to create the bruising for my knuckles. And I'm just dabbing that on with a paintbrush, and then I like to go in with a sponge and sort of finesse out the edges a little bit with a pouncing technique, just to make it to where it's not such of a hot maroon color. And then once I've got all of that pounced out to the way that I like it, I will then add the plum in as well. So when you think about the way that a bruise looks, right, like it's going to have a little bit of variation and some spotting in it, just depending on how that blood vessel gets busted, right? So you want to make sure it's got a little bit of variation. So sometimes even when I am putting the paintbrush over the knuckle, I'm sort of letting it just dust it a bit, because it helps to give it a little bit more of a splotchy, spattered look. And then I'm going to add in a little bit of yellow to the outside of it. So also when you think about a bruise, especially on someone who has my skin tone, it's going to start yellowing pretty quickly, especially on the outside edges. Now, the older the bruise gets, the more yellow it will end up turning, and it may end up getting a little bit of that green and brown into it. But since I'm doing something that's a little bit fresh, I'm just going to put a tad bit of yellowing around the sides. And I'm even like pouncing it straight onto some of those red edges that I have blended out a bit. Next, I'm going to use spirit gum to outline where I've road mapped out where I want my scar wax to go. So spirit gum is an adhesive that's actually going to let the scar wax stay. So it's got to dry for a little bit. Typically takes anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds. But once it's on there and it starts to get a little bit sticky or tacky, that's when you know it's good. So now we're ready for scar wax, y'all. So scar wax is the devil. I swear to you, it can smell fear, so you really have to show scar wax who's boss. But what I'm doing here is I've dug out a little bit, and I am rolling it into a little worm, almost like harkening back to your days, right, in childhood playing with Play-Doh. And you just roll it, and then you're going to push it into the skin. And you cannot be ginger with it, right? You're not like trying to hurt yourself, but you really have to force it into the skin to get a nice even blend. But I'm going to do the same thing, right? I'm creating just like a little worm here to create that other opening for my cut. And then I'm blending that in, just simply pushing it down and into the skin. Now, I am lucky that the scar wax that comes with my kit actually does really match my skin tone. If you need to, you can put your foundation color on top of this. Just know that you may have to go a shade lighter or darker depending on the shade of scar wax that you're using, because you're going to have to color correct then in for that shade of scar wax as well. So I'm actually using my tool here to just finesse some of these edges and create like a little slash inside of the scar wax to make it look like where the blade started the cut. So once I've got these edges finessed, I'm going all the way back to that bruise wheel, right? And I'm going to start with that red and fill in the space that I've created. So what I love about scar wax, right, like all I'm doing is filling this in and it already looks real. And we're not even halfway through this. All right, so when you are filling this in, you also want to make sure that you are filling in all the way to the edges, because you don't want to have any gaps of your skin showing, because you want to make sure that it all looks like it is muscle and such underneath. So you really want to make sure that you get into those crevices. The next thing that I actually like to add is a little bit of that plum color into some of the edges, just because it gives it dimension. It makes it sort of look like some of that blood is got a little bit of oxygen to it, and it just adds some depth in there as well. And so once I've got a little bit of this plum pounced into these areas, see, we've got a little bit more depth there with it, just to blend that into that maroon. But once we've got that in there, the next step is actually going to be adding in a little bit of Vaseline. So if I put Vaseline onto this brush, I can actually blend it into the paint that I've already put onto my hand, and it's going to absorb the color of the paint. So all of that pigment, right, is getting into that Vaseline, and it just makes it look wet and a little chunky depending on how much of the Vaseline you add in there. So it's a really great cheap effect to make that look just a little bit more real. So once I have all of that Vaseline in there, the next step is to add in blood. And I'm actually adding in two different types of blood just so that you can see the different variations. So the first special effects blood that I'm adding in is a Ben Nye blood that comes in the Theatrical Pro kits. So this blood is pretty thick, which is great because then you're able to take a tool like a sponge and really manipulate how it gets put onto the surface. What's also great about it is it creates really wonderful spattering effects with a brush or a sponge. The next I'm using some like cheapo Halloween blood. I think it's referred to as vampire blood. As you can see, it's got a pretty thin and translucent sort of look to it. So I am definitely using a brush that's loaded up with a little bit of that Ben Nye Bruce Wheel pigment just to get a little bit more color into it. And then I'm able to pick up a lot more of it and create some spatter as well, just because in this fight that I'm in, right, I'm going to have a little bit more blood sort of getting all over my hand a bit more. And then look at how cool that is. That's what I love about scar wax, right? I can move my hand and it's going to go with me. It's so creepy and awesome. It makes for a really realistic look. So the last little bits here that I'm going to do is I'm going to just keep finessing this and adding in blood spatter and just variations on putting this on top of what I've already created. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's so gross. Ugh, it's like you're seeing into the muscle. I love scar wax. I just think it's incredible. And the really wonderful thing about it is once you put a little bit of final seal or whatever like powder sealant that you need to on this stuff is good to go for a long time. And it's really great, and it's still able to be manipulated and moved, and it's just a perfect theatrical tool for special effects makeup. Now, the big thing that we have to look at is how we actually take this off. So I'm just going to use a regular makeup wipe, and I am going to wipe off all of that scar wax. It actually looks even more gross to take it off than it does to have it on. Look at that. It's crazy, right? So I'm going to wipe off as much of that as I can. And then thankfully, there's a product called Spirit Gum Remover that you see there. So I like to put it on top of a makeup wipe and rub it into the skin anywhere where I've put spirit gum because it helps to break down the adhesive so that my skin isn't still sticky. So I'm going to rub that all over my hand and get as much of that off as I can. Next, I'm actually going to go back to that Vaseline that I was using, just because you can see my hand has a bit of staining from all of the pigments that I've put on it. And the Vaseline will actually help to take it off. So you just rub it into the skin and let it sit for a little bit, and it will take off all of that staining. You can also do the same thing with coconut oil, but I prefer to use the Vaseline. And the really great thing about it is afterwards, my skin is so incredibly smooth. So it's almost like I had a beautiful spa day. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.